Mr. Chair.
I'm calling Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to stand and support the statements that are being made by the member Rhea Bond, also by David Clark. If I were to summarise the amendment that Rhea Bond has put before this House, it's basically, for the benefit of Mr. Hudson, back yourself. Back yourself. You know, to have Mr. Hudson stand up and say, that putting a timeline, a requirement on government agencies to actually implement the purpose of this bill would ruin the bill, says to me what an absolutely shambolic process this has been. Absolutely shambolic. Unfortunately, I did listen, Mr. Hudson, and that was my take-home point. Back yourself. If you believe that this bill can deliver for business in the way that you have described, and in fact, if you read the background papers to this bill, as I have, the Cabinet papers, the committee papers, the regulatory impact statements, they clearly set out that this bill will only be useful to business if the widest range of government agencies possible adopt the purpose of this bill, adopt the whole business number regime. So unless the government is willing to say that there are some requirements for those agencies to pick up the business number, then it won't achieve its purpose clause. It won't achieve the purpose as set out at the beginning of the bill. I want to reflect, though, the real reason, Mr. Hudson, it's not because necessarily the argument that you seem to put across that in putting a timeline, we suddenly don't understand technology on this side of the House. I find quite laughable to be lectured on that by the government who only in recent times lost basically $7 million in the Ministry of Justice by a failed e-bench project alone. That's before you start on NovaPay and every other failed technological project that government's tried to implement. Putting that aside, the most telling paper that I would recommend that Mr. Hudson read is the paper to the Cabinet Economic Growth and Infrastructure Committee from March 2015. It sets out the real reason that there's reluctance on that side of the House to put forward a date for implementation. Treasury has called this policy high risk because of concerns around government agencies implementing this proposal. And it sets out just the level of compulsion that government is trying to put behind these agencies in order to get the business number rolling. So it talks about the government directions. It says the government has previously stated that the main goal of the NZBN is to replace over time many of the separate identifiers currently used by business. However, no comprehensive statement is being made stating when or how this goal will be achieved. It's set out that as being problematic in the Cabinet paper. Consequently, many government agencies are unsure about what they need to do to meet the government's expectations. Well, we're setting out a path forward on that one with this amendment, or how to plan how to meet those expectations. It goes on. It says we consider the most appropriate vehicles to issue two directions. One to government departments under cover of the Cabinet Office Circular, the other under the Crown Entities Act. And what would those directions set out? It would set out the range of agencies to which the direction applies. It would set out a high-level description of what agencies need to do to achieve the goals and milestones. An implementation plan. What better place for it than in the bill itself?
Imagine it.
A requirement on agencies to report on progress annually. A centralised system for monitoring agencies' reports, including reporting to ministers on progress. Consideration would also need to be given to whether there should be a mechanism for resolving any disputes about whether an identifier is within scope of the NZBN policy, because it's not always clear whether an identifier that is currently being used by an agency should be replaced by the NZBN. What all of that tells us is the government knows the success or failure of this policy relies on its implementation, that it itself will be putting out directions to agencies to implement this policy. So all I am hearing is that there is a lack of confidence, Mr. Chair, a lack of confidence from the government that those agencies will be able to follow through. Right. That is what we're hearing, because it's absolutely clear in this cabinet paper that that implementation is reliant on that happening, and therefore the only reason it's not in the bill is because there's a fear they won't be able to deliver. Why else would you have to set up a dispute resolution mechanism from agencies who are going to push back that hard against a government direction? It also suggests to me, Mr. Speaker, a bit of a lack of confidence from those agencies as to whether or not they've got the capacity to deliver. And certainly we've seen, I think, a number of disasters as agencies have tried to transition to new government-imposed regimes, and perhaps there's a genuine fear amongst those agencies that they will, in that transition, be unable to deliver to their business clients. Perhaps that's one of the fears. But I want to just reflect again on the purpose clause set out in Part 1. The main purpose of the bill that we're debating, it's set out very clearly in 3 parts. The main purpose of this Act are to enable eligible entities in New Zealand to interact more easily with government. That's the goal. Government, I highlight there, that's a broad turn of phrase. Enable eligible entities in New Zealand to interact more easily with one another and reduce transaction costs in New Zealand. And then C is the how. Those big giant goals are all going to be achieved by establishing and maintaining the New Zealand Business Number Register. That is a big goal. It's all linked into the government's desire under Better Public Service Agenda Result Area 9, which I always think sounds like a bad sci-fi movie. Better Public Service Agenda Result Area 9, which is to reduce the cost of dealing with government by 25%, a big goal. Now, I can absolutely see why the government sees that goal as hinging on the successful failure of the business number. I can see that, because it's all about transaction costs, transaction government to government. What I'm concerned about is the degree with which business believe this is the most useful thing government could be doing. Now, I'd like to ask the Minister and the Chair, because it seems clear to me from some of the other cabinet papers I've read, that they have surveyed business in this regard. Perhaps in 2013, a piece of work, The Benefits of a New Zealand Business Number, the Opinions of New Zealand Businesses, was conducted. I don't know if the Select Committee was ever provided with that research, but excerpts seem to have made their way into the cabinet paper and include statements like, during public consultation in March this year on extending the NZBN to all businesses, larger businesses and industry representatives strongly supported extending the NZBN, so big business think good. Smaller businesses were less enthusiastic. Smaller businesses were less enthusiastic. Why? What was it about the NZBN that they had concerns about? Where is the discussion and dialogue about that? Because if we want to fulfil that big, bold purpose clause, we need to answer that question. All the cabinet paper tells me is that, quote, this is likely to reflect a lack of knowledge about the NZBN. So there's a bit of an ignorant kind of arrogant kind of view in there that they just and it continues, para 24. A small number of individuals and small businesses commented. Some of these did not see any value in NZBN. Again, another statement that small businesses question the value of this $14 million project. Again, it's explained why by, although a number of these appeared to be giving their initial reaction. I want to see more detail on why it was small businesses had big question marks over this. Look, you can theorise around why it could be potentially beneficial, big business see the value of it, but why is it that those small businesses simply did not? What opportunity is potentially being missed here by there being a lack of transparency around that research, which I think could have really helped the consideration of the Select Committee and helped us ultimately make sure that this big, bold purpose clause isn't hollow in its aims, that we make sure that the NZBN isn't just about one section of our business community, but genuinely is something that proves useful for the majority of our businesses, which tend to be small, which are indeed small to medium-sized enterprises. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to contributing to the debate on other parts of this bill.
I'm calling Simon.